happen to be lucky enough that if you have an athlete who's very fast, suddenly you become somewhat important. So life is really more about recruitment than having lots of knowledge, but if you can do that. I wanted to give you a bit of a sense, of some history of where we come from. So for my fortunate situation, literally as Steve said, I was there from the day one, like point zero. So Triathlon Ontario was actually my residence room at McMaster University 27 years ago. So when you were joining and calling the hotline, you're actually calling my room at McMaster University. And I got concerned a couple years into it, and it was only what I see in this room tonight, which is a whole bunch of old people, no kids. And so you'll hear briefly of why Kids of Steel was such an important element in my mind in our growth and where we've gone to. So I happened to be lucky enough after Simon's victory that there was really nobody who did commentary around the sport virtually in the world. And so I got calls pretty quickly and was really just in the right place at the right time. And I now spend 17 or 18 weekends a year in places like Japan and Hawaii and Germany, and I'll be in Stockholm in a couple of weeks, and Korea and so forth. Wherever the series goes around the world, I'm doing the live television. So you may not realize it, but it's actually Canadians who really are driving a lot of this. And a lot of it happened because the international president was a Canadian and was for 20 years of the sport's growth. So he used to call it quietly the Canadian Mafia, and there were some of us that got snuck into jobs, probably weren't very talented at it when we started, but had a chance to grow. So I'm doing live TV on a weekly basis all around the world, so I get to see these athletes, but not just the pros, the amateurs as well. Just so you understand where this comes from, and I was really lucky, 2 weeks ago I was in Chicago doing the live TV there, and it was a Hall of Fame induction supper for U.S. Triathlon. And they inducted 4 amazing people, but one of the amazing people was a husband and wife combination, Judy and John Collins, who were the people who created the Ironman. And I'd heard all these stories, drunken night in Hawaii, arguing over who was the fittest, but I finally got to actually hear from the sources. They belonged to the San Diego Running Club, and in 1974, like in September, coming up 40 years ago, coming up this September, they were at a guy's birthday party, and they decided to break up the run workout that they used to do at the beach. Why don't we, we already bike to the beach anyway and cool down in the water, why don't we do it in a structured way? So September 1974, this literally, you're looking at the first ever triathlon on the beach, Mission Bay in San Diego. And as it turned out, I didn't realize till last week, John and Judy were in that club and they happened to be a part of that race. He got shipped over to Hawaii, he's a Navy captain, and he loved to run, so he joined the marathon group in the area, and his wife liked to swim, so she joined the Waikiki 2.4 mile, that's where the distance comes from, swim program that already existed in the race. He belonged to the Honolulu Marathon running team, there's the 26 miles. And when their friends got together, they would argue over whose friends were fittest, and they decided that they couldn't just have a swim and a run race, it would be a tie. They needed a third event, and there was already around the island of Oahu 112-mile bike ride, and that became the Ironman in 1978. 15 people started, 12 of them finished, and he and his wife went on to do other things in their lives, but that's sort of where the Ironman came into the whole picture. Okay. Just a few years later, this guy, Les McDonald, who had won his age group in Hawaii for 5 consecutive years in the mid-50 category, age 55, 56, he said, you know what, this sport has no rules. Like, people just sort of show up, there's no sort of real rules other than just pay your entry fee. And he came from a skiing background, and Nancy Green was one of his athletes that he'd worked with when she was a young girl, went on to win the '68 Winter Olympics in skiing. And so he decided we need to have something that looks like a World Cup skiing. And the Olympics became his dream to get triathlon into the Olympic Games. So in the old days, the Americans, and this was a guy named Mike Bigg who happened to actually be inducted when I was there, you can see their wild aerodynamic bars that they have. It was really just as hard as you could go for Olympic distance or for ultimately the Ironman. But these guys, these pros and amateurs, did the exact same format. You'll see the evolution in a second. Thanks, Sean. The Australians were one of the powerhouses from day one. It's a lifestyle. They live on the beach. You can't get out of 3 of the states in Australia. You can't get out of school unless you do a triathlon. That's how you get your check mark. We live on an island. We should know how to swim. Everybody should bike. Everyone runs. You don't get a check mark unless you do that. And they have literally identified half a dozen world champions just in their high school graduation program. They go, dude, you know you could be a champion? And literally I've met these kids 3 years later, they're winning medals. So similar to our hockey scenario, that's what they've got over there. So Kids of Steel was something that was very near and dear to my heart. It started at McMaster University 26 years ago. And the whole idea was, how do you get kids active? So we host races, and the one I hold in Caledon, we have 110 kids just in the 3, 4, 5 age category. You can see them right there. There's their tricycles, their water wings, all the way through. And Sean and many of the others that have come to our national team all got their starts in Kids of Steel. So I would love us to, at some point, think of having a Kids of Steel race right in this building with your grandkids or your next door neighbor's kids, etc. And it's not about winning. Every kid gets the exact same medal that Simon Whitfield got 26 years ago. Simon just happened to go at a little race in Sharbot Lake. His next door neighbor owned a cottage in Sharbot Lake. They lived in Kingston. He showed up for the race, didn't win, but I met him that weekend, and he was 12 years old, I think, at the time. He's now 39, so we've spent most of his life together. Okay. So this was our very first team. 1989 was the first ever World Championships. The year before in Hawaii, all these countries got together and they said, let's start a World Championships. Where do we do it? Well, we've got to go to Europe because you can get 40 countries that can show up on a train in Europe, whereas North America, it's a lot of travel. So they went to Avignon, France, and literally the Canadians bought whatever they could find in the Toronto and Vancouver airports, and if it had a maple leaf on it, they wore it, that was their uniform. And this was the start of the World Championships. This guy here, just in the corner, got elected to that very first World Championships as the first president. And for 21 years, his dream was to get us into the Olympic Games. And to be in Sydney Olympic Games in just 11 years is like unbelievable. Sports would say to me, how did that old man do it? He was retired. He literally, with very little money and a lot of frequent flyer points from caring people in Canada who cared about the sport, traveled all over the world, and he'd have a book I would travel with him. It had all 104 IOC members, their husband or wife's name, the sport their kid did, and he made it a job. Over 5 years, he got in the face of 101 to 104. And when they had to make the decision in 1994, what is the new sport coming into the Olympic Games, triathlon got in ahead of all these other sports like golf and others that have been trying for years and years and were well financed. He got us in. It's in a very short order. But one of the things, thanks, Sean, that they requested, and this is Gord Brocky, literally, who's in the room, is in this picture. So Gord, just give a wave here. You were in that picture, I know you were. Gord's turning 80. He's Canada's oldest Ironman finisher. Raced on many teams around the world. I think I remember racing with him in 1991 in the Gold Coast. This is 1992 up in Deerhurst in Huntsville. We now have teams of 300 and 400 people. I'll be out in Edmonton hosting the World Championships in a month. And literally, there will be 16 spots in ladies 30 to 34, and the men's 45 to 49, every category. And we have athletes who will be racing over the age of 80 for Canada at the World Championships. So some of you, I guarantee you, in the next 1 or 2 years, next year's World Championships are in Chicago, they'd be there. So this is what age group growth has happened. And in there, about 3 things. The president wanted absolute equality for men and women. And that was one of the things that got us into the Olympics. So if you go to bike racing right now, the women go 17 kilometers in the middle of the night with no prize money, and the men race for 21 days on the Tour de France for millions of dollars. Men and women, exact prize money, exact distance, exact starting time. And so it's not that surprising when you go to a race now, you might see 45, 46% of the starters as females. They're equally respected, they can make a career at it, they get the same medal at the finishing line, they're not sent off on a different course with no spectators, etc. And our national teams have about 40+%. Thanks. So the great Mark Allen, if you followed the sport for a while, won that first World Championships, and Aaron Baker on the women's side. You'll now see there's much more of a divergence of people who focus only on the longer stuff, the pros, or those who focus mostly on the shorter stuff that you saw in the Commonwealth Games a couple days ago, etc. Part of it is the speed is so fast that now it would be hard for somebody, for example, to be the marathon champion of Canada and the 3K steeplechase. The distances are a little bit different. But in their era, they would race what was called the U.S. Bud Light Series for like 8 months, and then they finished the year off with the Hawaii Ironman. And that's what all the pros at that era used to do. So they did short, fast stuff for 5 to 6 months, then they did a training camp for 2, 3, 4 months to get ready for Hawaii. I'm just trying to give you a fairly quick history to understand. Canadians have always played a very significant role. This woman, probably none of you other than Gord will know her name, but she made history back in 2000 at the first Olympic Games in Sydney. No one has ever, and still to this point has ever, made 2 Olympic sports at the same Olympic Games. Now you might have done a Winter Olympics in speed skating and a summer in cycling, or you might have done 3 swims in the swimming pool, or 2 bike races, 5 cross-country ski races, but no one has ever done, and she qualified for the 10,000 meters at the Olympics and the triathlon at the same Olympic Games. It was unheard of. Like, she ran 32:11 to qualify on the track for 10,000 meters. And those of us who run 10K, you know, if you break 40, you know, we're really proud. If you break 45, it's probably a good day for most of us. She ran 32:11 and also won world championship titles for Canada. So she was actually the name when we were going into the Olympics. It was Carol Montgomery, not Simon Whitfield. Simon had never won a race of significance before the day he won the Olympic Games. Okay?